Welcome again to our online Bible study here at Pine Valley Church of Christ. And we have been going through the letter of James, the brother of Jesus, so it is believed, and his emphasis on the importance of a practical faith, something that is real, something that can be seen in a person's life and not just something that we think about and sort of proclaim rather than really putting into practice. And he truly has been emphasizing the importance of that and making sure that we understand it's all about focus. What are we thinking about? What are we focusing on in our lives? And so as we get going, let me get our screen shared up. We think about the hurdles that we face in life. I mentioned Sunday that in middle school, I was asked to run the high hurdles for our track team, which was rather challenging to begin with because we only had one hurdle to practice with. The coach finally got us a couple more a few days later, so we had three. But it's very different than having to go over 10 over 110 yards. And so, it's something that you really struggle with at first. And life is full of those kind of hurdles. In fact, life is much more like what we see in the Olympics and in the steeplechase, where they have to run long distances, they have to jump over barriers, they have to go through water hazards. It is just a grueling test of endurance. And that's the way life is. And that's especially our life in Jesus Christ and hanging on to our faith and all the struggles and hurdles that we have to go over in this world. And that's something that James has been emphasizing since the very beginning. And we've looked at how the first chapter introduces all of the other subjects that are talked about in the book of James. He began with talking about the importance of perseverance, persistence. Now, this can lead to the perfecting of your faith, and that's an important thought for us to come back to. But we have to endure to the end, and that's picked up later in chapter 5 again. The importance of prayer, how connected that is to our endurance and our life together. The trading places that's going to take place, or already has, the difference in the way in which God looks at us and the world, and the way we should be looking at it versus the way the world does. And that is in that the humble will be lifted up and the arrogant will be humbled. And again, that's picked up later in the book in chapter 4 and 5. The importance of, again, understanding you can't blame anything on God. There can't be this is just, making excuses because you're trying to show yourself as self-righteous. So don't ever say, I'm being tempted by God. Don't try to put the blame on him if you can't endure and you can't do these things. But we are tempted by our own evil desires that are inside of us. And so we turn to God and seek his wisdom rather than the wisdom of the world, which focuses on our own personal wants and desires, the way the world thinks versus the way God wants us to think. And in particular, then at the end of chapter 1, the importance of putting your faith to practice and humbling ourselves before God and receiving the implanted word that saves our souls and live our practical faith, which again is picked up in chapter 2. Behind it all, kind of woven in between all of it, is the idea of that evil little thing that lives within us and our tongue and things that it can say that are so damaging and hurting. But a reminder of Jesus's own teaching that what comes out of our mouth comes out of our heart. And so we must be careful and making sure that we are speaking the things that are lifting up others and are truly praising God, and are not just uh, a proclamation of something in our faith or a belief in God, and yet turn around and we curse others and we denigrate them and we hurt them terribly. We want to go back and sort of see how all of this connects together now, because he wants us to understand the importance of all these things rolling together to help us. And we're calling this Get Your Head in the Game Part 2. Part 1 was our very first lesson. And reminding us again, what are we supposed to focus on and how do all these things work together? And, he begins at the very beginning, those first few verses, to help us understand the goal that he is seeking, which is the perfecting of our faith through various trials that we're going to go through in this life, using the wisdom of God rather than the wisdom of men, so that we can endure to the end. And today we're going to seek to better understand this idea of what it is to perfect our faith and the importance of that in our life in Jesus Christ. And so he talks about this path to perfection in chapter 1, in those first verses 2 through 7. Consider it great joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you experience various trials, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. If you lack wisdom, ask God, who gives all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith without doubting. For the doubter is like the surging sea, driven and tossed by the wind, and that person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord, being double-minded and unstable in all his ways. And so he sets it out from the very beginning. We can't be of the world and of God. We can't have that double mind in terms of the way in which we approach life, the way in which we think. It will cause us to doubt whether God will actually fulfill his promises or that we'll get what we want. And says, but if you endure in your faith, and even consider it great joy. That's where it all begins. It's the attitude that we go into it from the very beginning, and that you experience these various trials. Well, what are some of those trials that he mentions throughout? There are external trials that we go through. There was the persecution that they were facing as Jewish Christians from their Jewish families who have felt that they had left the faith. They were receiving external persecution from the communities around them and ridicule. They were facing the pressures and temptations of the world around them. He mentions the temptation of the wealth and desire for wealth, because that's the way the world looks at things, and the influence of the world. He talks about the allure of riches, which usually end up in the rich oppressing the poor. They show favoritism, and there is unfair judgment based on how much a person has or what kind of clothes they wear. And it even leads to improper judging within the community of Jesus Christ. And we can receive, even within the body, as he mentions over in chapters 4 and 5, criticism, slander, complaining or grumbling, and judging. These are all things that come out. We don't necessarily have any control ourselves, but we have to be aware of them so that we can ask God for the wisdom that he will give us if we truly want it, and ask in faith. And how do we handle these things that come at us from that we have no control over externally? But then there's all the internal, and there's actually more about that discussed throughout the book than anything else, in terms of doubt or being double-minded. You don't receive what you want because you're asking because of evil desire. Your anger can get in the way of fulfilling the righteousness of God. The lack of internal inspection or retrospection, and just sort of that picture of looking in the mirror very briefly and moving on without really taking time to examine ourselves, and versus the one who looks at the intently at the perfect law of love that God has given us. Of course, the tongue speaking what comes from the heart, seeking approval from others, wanting either from external appearance in terms of clothing, or just in terms of the way in which we present ourselves religiously. And this was one of the things that Jesus criticized the scribes and the Pharisees for extensively throughout his life and ministry, that they were more concerned with the praise of men than the praise of God. We can become spiritually lazy. We're not spending the time in prayer that we should, time together that we should, doing the things that express our faith and strengthen it. That can come from arrogance, it can come from envy, selfish ambition, and all of these things coming from just having the wrong motives, which are based on the way in which the world thinks rather than God. And so that is sort of the underwriting theme throughout the whole thing is, will we focus on things from the divine point of view or from the human point of view? And from that divine wisdom that God will give us, or will we stay focused then on those things which are important and that will help us deal with the temptations, the trials, the persecution that we might deal with in this life? All of this is part of that path to perfection, knowing that our testing your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its full effect. In other words, the full effect of endurance is, or the completion of endurance is, that you will be complete and lack nothing. You will have the kind of faithful life that God wants you to have. But it's even more than that, which we'll come back to. But overall, then, he says this leads to the proper speech and behavior in the followers of Jesus Christ. This is something that is lived, it is spoken, it takes over our entire lives. And so not only just in singing praises to God or saying that we belong to God or making some kind of confession of Jesus Christ as our Savior, it leads to a speech that is also encouraging others and building up other brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. It leads to a behavior that seeks to fulfill the needs of our brothers and sisters around us. As he says, it is of no value if your supposed faith sees a brother and sister who are in need, whether it's food or clothing or anything else, and you simply say to them, go in peace, stay warm, and be well fed. But don't give them or provide them with what they need. He says, it is of no value. It's no good. And faith without works is dead. It has to show itself. And some believe that there's a conflict here between how James is approaching things and how Paul approaches things, but there's really not when you take everything into consideration. Paul has always talked about the importance of faith being lived, and besides just certain individual phrases that are brought out, such as Romans 3:28, where it talks about, we are saved by faith apart from the law. And so that has been taken to be, it's apart from anything else. It's just all about what's, your faith, your confession. And it is faith. We are saved by grace through faith, not by anything that we do, Paul says in Ephesians chapter 2. But he goes on to say, but How do we demonstrate that faith? By doing the works prepared in advance by God for us to do. In Acts chapter 26, when he's talking to Festus, telling him about his conversion experience and the mission that was given to him by God to go forth and proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he says, and I was faithful to that mission, and I have preached repentance to the people, and that they show their repentance through their deeds, through their acts. It is because repentance is a turning around and going in the opposite direction. That's a path that you're taking. It's a direction that you're going. It's what you're focusing on in your life. And it is James who really brings this open, because throughout the book we've seen all these references to the Old Testament law and quotations from it, references to it. And we are reminded in Matthew 5, toward the end of that chapter, where Jesus says he didn't come to get rid of the law, he came to fulfill the law. And as his followers, we are living a law-fulfilling life. Not that in what we do saves us, we are saved by grace, but we show our faith in what we do, how we truly live the heart of the law, not just making it a checklist to say, oh, look what I have done, which turns into a self-righteousness, and we are saving ourselves and not God and his grace. And so Paul and James are very much in touch with each other. Just Paul is writing to a predominantly Gentile audience who didn't grow up with the law. James is writing to Jewish Christians who grew up with the law. And he's trying to help them see the connection with it and how Jesus is the fulfillment of those things. And it leads to us living the right kind of life in covenant relationship with God that God has wanted with his people from the very beginning. And so he says, to help you, understand this better, let's visualize some things. You hear athletes talking about visualizing things. A golfer will visualize his shot before he hits his golf ball. Steph Curry talked about at the end of the NBA finals how he had some injury problems the past year, and he and his fitness trainer had visualized what kind of fitness he needed to be in to compete all the way through a season and through all of the playoffs to win a championship. And that's what they did, because they thought about what had to be done. They had a picture in their head. James approaches it from, again, drawing from Israelite history, and all beginning with the father of Israel and the father of faith, Abraham, who we are reminded is that first example of the faith being worked out through and being demonstrated through obedience at the end of chapter 2. And he talks about his willingness to make the sacrifice. But it began back, that's in chapter 22 of Genesis. It began back in chapter 15 when God told him, when he didn't have any children and they had been barren for a long time, that he would have a son, and through that child, they would grow into a great nation of people. And God, he says, Abraham believed God, and God credited it to him as righteousness. But it was in chapter 22 when we are told that God tested that faith, not tempted him to do evil. He was checking, is that faith strong enough? Has it grown to the point where he is willing to do what is asked of him by me out of obedience? So he tells him to take his only son, Isaac, to the mountain and to sacrifice him. And he's willing to do that and is about to do so when God stops him. He says, he showed his obedience. He showed his faith through his faith through his obedience, through his actions. The one whom he says in verse 23 of chapter 2, and he was called God's friend, which is a reference to some of the passages in Isaiah and in the Psalms. A friend of God. Why? Because he truly gave himself completely over to God, not necessarily always understanding what God wanted him to do, but whatever God asked is what he did. Another example right after that then is the Canaanite prostitute Rahab, citizen of Jericho, who shows great hospitality to the spies of Israel, hides them in straw on her roof, gives them shelter until they're able to get away, because she tells them that she has heard the stories, her family, and they believe the God of Israel is the one true God. And she makes not only a confession, just as Abraham did, but she acts upon it. She shows hospitality to them, but she also risks her own life. And as a reward, her family is the only one in the city of Jericho who survive after the walls collapse. And this is a promise that has been made to her because of her obedience, her hospitality, her faith is acted on. And he uses Job then as a picture of that great endurance that he is seeking from his people, whether it is in chapter 5, the brothers, the prophets who spoke in the Lord's name, as an example of suffering and patience. We count blessed those who have endured, and you've heard of Job's endurance and seen the outcome that the Lord brought. And Job had everything that you could think of that anyone would want. And then God allows Satan to take it all away from him. Possessions, family, everything, to the point where his wife yells at him to curse God and die. And Job will not do it. And we are told that in all these things, Job did not sin. And finally, through the end, after the long discussion with his friends who had come to comfort him, who tried to explain to him how God worked, God comes into the conversation, says, y'all don't know what you're talking about. You have no way of truly understanding me or my ways. But Job has endured. He has not sinned. And what he has done, even though he has questioned, he has doubted, he's gone through horrible things, but he endured. And God blesses him twice as much as he was before. But Job endured through all of that. And it's a great way for us to think about, to visualize what he's wanting us to think about here in terms of the perfecting of our faith. And the last example he gives is then of Elijah, who is the example of one giving prayer of faith. And we know from going back and looking at the story in Kings that Elijah prays what God tells him to pray, but he prays it in faith. He believes that it's going to happen because God has said it's going to happen. And he believes that. And there's no doubting on his part. There's no double-minded thinking as there are amongst Ahab and Jezebel, the king and the queen, or others that are around him. And it's another powerful image as he connects this to the importance of our own individual prayer, but also our community of life prayer. And us praying for one another, confessing to one another, calling on the elders to pray for us when we are sick, calling out to each other, encouraging one another when we see someone who is falling from their, losing their faith. And all of these things work together. And this is sort of the overall running theme through here of what leads to this perfecting or completion of our faith, the completeness of it, which in the end, the real completeness comes through a humbling of ourselves, giving ourselves completely over to God, and He will lift us up. Focusing on Him and what He has promised He will do, believing that He will do it, so that we can finish. Because that's when the real completeness, the real perfection of our faith comes into being. It's when we finish the race, whether it is we die in this life or Jesus comes back and calls us all home. But we endure to the end. We finish the race. Because that is the ultimate completion, the ultimate perfection or fullness of faith. And it is going through all those trials, making all those hurdles, going through all those obstacles and all the water hazards and all the things that we have to deal with in life that can make us stronger. The old phrase, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. Well, we tend not to think that way when it comes to spiritual life or faith or even life in general. We tend to give in to that, oh, woe is me, how horrible things are. James says, no, it's there. And if you ask God, He will give you the wisdom and He will give you the strength. He will empower you through His word, through His Holy Spirit, because He is the one who has given us the word of truth. And if we will humbly receive that implanted word, it is able to save our souls. And that is the promise of God. That promise that is mentioned in chapter 1, verse 12. Blessed is the one who endures trials, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love Him. What a powerful promise. What a wonderful hope that we have. If we endure all the trials, all the obstacles, and we allow it to strengthen us, to produce in our faith endurance. Because if we stood the test, if we finish, we receive the crown of life that God has promised. And we can know, as James has emphasized throughout his letter, God always keeps His promises. Just ask Abraham. I've enjoyed our study of the book of James together, and we are looking forward to future studies together. We'll be moving into a study of the kingdom of God called Kingdom Come. What is the kingdom of God all about? What is our part in it? Has it come? Is it in the process of coming? Is it going to come sometime in the future? These are things that we're going to look at. And how does that affect our view of life in this world? And what kind of purpose does that really give us as the people of God going out into a lost and sinful world? So that's what will be going in the weeks to come. I thank you for joining us again this week. And until we meet again, may God bless you and keep you safe and healthy.